Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 447 of the MTGGoldfish podcast. I'm Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and we have a very special crew this week. You probably noticed, no Richard, no Crim. Richard's out sick, Crim's kind of in a hurricane, so we're joined today by Tomer, probably better known as Budget Commander. Tomer, good to have you on the Goldfish. When was the last time you were on this cast? Was it like, oh my goodness, I forgot.
I think it was Vegas.
It was Vegas, and then you swore a bunch, and we banned you from the podcast.
Yes,
and now we're in desperation mode, so Tomer's back.
When the world is on fire, when there's hurricanes, you dare come to me? You must truly be desperate. Yes,
thank you.
hi.
Thank you so much for doing it, Tomer. So today, we're going to have a fun cast. We are like right smack dab in the middle of Wilds of Eldraine spoilers. We've had almost an entire week of spoilers. There's still more coming. Commander precons are coming. Still more main set stuff. But we're going to talk about Wilds of Eldraine and what we think of this. I got some cards I really want to ask Tomer about, get his opinion on. He has some cards he's want to ask me about. So that's going to be the main plan for today. Talking everything Wilds of Eldraine. Before we jump into it, though, a reminder that today's show is brought to you by Card Conduit. And Card Conduit, they're the easiest way to sell your Magic cards. If you ever get tired of all the hassles that go into buy listing your cards, Card Conduit lets you skip them. You can use their curated service and send in as many cards as you want with a buy list value of $1 or more and pay just a 5% fee. And if you want to do a little bit of work, you can use the sorted service where you list and sort your cards in advance and pay just a 2% fee. And no matter which option you choose, you'll get a detailed report with the results and a fast payment once the order is processed. And you can even get another 10% off by heading over to cardconduit.com/MTGGoldfish. Card Conduit, they're the easiest way to sell your Magic cards. So thank you to Card Conduit for supporting the show. So Tomer, Wilds of Eldraine, we're in the middle of spoiler season. Before we get into the cards, I gotta ask you, what do you think of this set so far? I feel like we've seen a big enough chunk of it that we can actually start, making some judgments about what we think of the power level, the flavor. How are you feeling overall about Wilds of Eldraine?
So overall, I don't really know power level because I feel like half these cards are very hard to eyeball. Like adventures in particular, I feel like I need to play with them, or at least most of them, to see how they are in 1v1 formats. But I really like the flavor of it. I like the storybook fairy tale setting of Eldraine. And I think one thing I really appreciate about this revisiting of Eldraine is that there's a lot of unexplored territory that they're covering with this new style. They're looking at the wilds of Eldraine. So we covered the focus on the humans, the knights, their courts and everything, the human side of Eldraine, the structured and ordered side. And now we're venturing into the wilds, we're venturing into the forest, we're dealing with the fae and everything. And I think that's really nice. It's unexplored territory that still feels like Eldraine. I very much don't like when we go to we revisit a plane and then it's oh, Bolas has now just exploded the plane. And it's War of the Spark. And the plane is now just a backdrop for this interplanar war. That doesn't interest me as much. I like diving into the immersion of the plane itself. And I think this one really hit me very well in terms of the flavoring and the setting and everything. And it feels like a good return to a setting. But what do you think, Seth? Are you big on lore or setting or anything flavor?
I mean, so I do like the
tokens.
Flavor of Eldraine. I will say, so I'm not super big into the lore and flavor. That's just never been my main thing, although I've come to appreciate it more. When I first started, I cared not at all about the lore and flavor, but I've come to appreciate it more. I actually hadn't connected that Wilds of Eldraine was out in the wilds until you just mentioned that, but that actually makes a lot of sense because this set I was thinking, okay, this feels very much like Eldraine. The flavor reminds me a lot of the original Eldraine, but it still feels new. It's not like they're just rehashing all the same old ideas. So I think you are very right that that's what they're doing. And it's really interesting. It's we're seeing another side of this plane or this world that we just didn't see before. So I think it's very interesting. There's some weird stuff mice and raccoons and stuff like that, but very Eldraine in, and it does really hit the fairy tale flavor or whatever of the set. So I'm pretty hyped for it. I think part of the reason the power level I think is tricky to judge is I feel like there's a lot of synergy cards or stuff that's like really good in a certain archetype or with a certain theme, but not good in a general sense. And I think this is a good thing for 60 card formats. I think one of the problems we have in 60 card formats is we get these cards that are just like the best option in every deck. Like right now in standard, Sheoldred is just like the best thing to play no matter what deck you're playing. Or we had Fable the Mirror Breaker. It was just the best thing. You're splashing red in your decks just because you got to play Fable. I feel like this set is a little bit different where we get cards that are really, really powerful, but they're cards that are built only for a specific archetype. I think the best example of this that I've seen so far is Archon of the Wild Rose, which is a 4-mana 4/4 flyer. This says other creatures you control that are enchanted by auras you control have base power and toughness of 4/4 and flying. That's a card that I think in a deck, we have this roll mechanic that's just creatures putting auras on everything. In a deck that's just like playing a bunch of these roll cards that are putting auras on themselves when they come into play. To me, this seems like an incredibly powerful finisher. Imagine just like 1-drop that puts a roll on thing, 2-drop, 3-drop, same thing. You drop this, all of a sudden you're just swinging for like 12 in the air, closing out the game and maybe one attack. But if you're not doing that, then Archon of the Wild Rose is pretty meh. Like a 4/4 flyer is okay, but it's not something you're going to play like Sheoldred in a deck that isn't built around the mechanic. So I really like how Wizards is trying to design this set. My problem is like, Sheoldred still exists, and those generically powerful cards still exist. So I feel like if they keep designing sets like this, in like a year or two, 60 card formats are going to be in a really sweet place. We just got to wait for all the old like Sheoldreds to eventually rotate out at this point. But I really like where they're heading with this set design-wise, I think.
I guess they also have to make sure that synergy decks are not too good, because I remember the last time we were in Eldraine, one of the biggest issues was that adventures had payoffs that were just wow. What was it? The Innkeeper or something? It was
Edgewall Innkeeper, just a 1-mana 1/1. You play in an adventure, you draw a card, and there was also Lucky Clover, which was just 2-mana artifact, copy your adventures. And that one actually ended up getting banned. It was so strong. So it is a tightrope. I think you're right. And we've seen that in the past with like energy, or like if you go back a long time, like Lauren Era fairies. Like if you build these synergy decks and they end up being too strong, then it can be kind of miserable. But if you can hit it in the right sweet spot where it's like strong enough to be competitive but not breaking the game, then I think in theory you end up in a really like diverse, fun place in 60 card formats. At least that's what I'm hoping we're heading towards. But Tomer, let's talk about some of these individual cards. I got one I got to ask you about. So this is one of the hype cards from the set, a new mythic, which is apparently the son of Oko, if I understand the lore right, and Kellen the Fey-Blooded. So this is a new adventure card, and this does something we've never seen before on adventures, which is a legend with adventure. So its creature side is a 3-mana red fairy human. It's a legend, it has double strike. It says other creatures you control get +1/+0 for each aura or equipment that's attached to Kellen. And then its spell side is Birthright Boon, 2-mana white sorcery. Search your library for an aura or equipment, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. So when I saw this, for 60 card formats, like it's kind of cute. I think this is designed for Commander though. This is like a spell in your command zone, right? This is like open the armory as your commander that you can repeatedly cast from the command zone. Is this broken? Should I be scared at like, what do we think about spells in the command zone? Because we haven't really seen this much before, right? Like, have we had spells? I guess there's some of the MDFCs from like Strixhaven, like Jadzy or something, but they were all like pretty bad and not really played.
Something the Blood God or something, Awaken the Blood God or something. That saw a decent amount of play in Commander at least.
So what do you think? What do you think about Kellen? You're the equipment player. Is this the best Cauldron? The best Cauldron commander now?
I think maybe I like the colors, your access to Boros, but I don't think inherently having Instas and Sorceries in our command zone is necessarily a bad thing. Like we've had commanders that immediately tutor, and I feel like this is very similar to that, where we have like Godo, Bandit Warlord. He takes Helm the Host and immediately combos off. He's even a CDH deck. There was like Nazan, which can either fetch up a hammer or fetch up any equipment. So we do have like tutors that are commanders that can immediately tutor equipment. So that's not particularly new, but it is new that I think this is the first time that we've ever had like a straight up like a adventure card in the command zone. And I have noticed a lot of confusion, at least about the rules. A lot of my friends, when this card got previewed, they started asking me like, does the command tax work on this? Like, how does this work? And the answer is basically, if you cast anything from the command zone, like any commander from the command zone, the next time it will cost 2 more. It's a cumulative tax, the commander tax. So it doesn't matter if you're casting like a creature, if you're casting an instant or a sorcery. If you're casting it from the command zone, each subsequent time that you cast it will cost 2 more times. So if you cast Birthright Boon, the adventure side of it, from the command zone, and then you put this back into the command zone afterwards, either because you exiled Kellen and then you cast the Kellen creature and it dies and you put it back to the command zone, or you decide not to put it on an adventure at all, you can just put it back straight into the command zone to cast it later. It doesn't matter. Once you cast it the second time from the command zone, it's going to cost 2 more. So that's just like a clarification for people who are listening.
That is a good reminder, because I've been confused by that in the past. But really, the command tax is pretty hard, right? There's no getting around it. Like, if you think it's being taxed, it probably is, because there's no avoiding the tax. Although one of the nice things about how this works is the adventure mode kind of avoids the tax. So you can cast the spell side, put Kellen into exile, and then cast it for 3 mana from exile, because it's not the command zone, so you're not paying a tax on that, correct? And then next time it dies or whatever, it goes back to the command zone. The spell side would be 4, the creature side would be 5, but like, it is cool that you can kind of cast it twice, and it even curves into itself. You like play this, tutor up Sunforger or whatever, then the next turn run out your Kellen. I'm wondering about the actual design of the Kellen side too, though. Like, to me, this is kind of a weird card, because with like equipment decks, you often have either go tall decks or go wide decks. You have like commanders that you want to put a ton of equipment on this one commander and Voltron kill, or you want to put a bunch of one equipment on a whole bunch of creatures, and that's how you benefit from it. Kellen's kind of both, right? Like, it wants you to put a ton of equipment and auras on it, but it also wants you to have a very big board of creatures to benefit from its pumping ability. So even though it's just another Boros equipment commander and we get one every set, it does feel a little unique to me, because it kind of like walks this weird line between like wanting you to play a ton of creatures, but also put a ton of auras and equipment on it.
Yeah, it's definitely straddling, it's adding a new twist to Boros equipment. And yes, we've seen 1,000 Boros equipment commanders at this point. It's kind of a meme. But it does do it a little bit differently. Like, it's a double striker. It holds all your equipments very well. Anything with combat triggers, like all the swords, fit very well onto Kellen. You don't need other creatures on the board to get extra advantage out of your equipments with Kellen. But then once you do have like other creatures on the battlefield, if there's just like utility creatures like Pure Steel Paladin or whatnot that you want to be running an equipment deck and they just kind of chill, they don't necessarily need to hold onto the equipment themselves, then they can become big armies later on. Like, they can start hitting for a lot of damage. I feel like the Kellen side is like, of the equipment commanders, it's okay. Like, it doesn't give them extra toughness, so like that's a little bit awkward. Like, if you're attacking with a Pure Steel Paladin, if it's like an A2 or whatever, you're still probably going to be dissuaded from doing it just because you don't want your creatures to die. But if you do like a go wide token style, like a bunch of 1/1 somehow, and there are equipments that do produce like expendable token creatures, then it can be quite good. So it is a unique design choice. But I want to tell you about my favorite new card for Commander. It's not actually a legendary creature, Seth, but how excited for you are you on turtles? Specifically Blossoming Tortoise. This is a 4-mana, 3/3 turtle, green turtle, so 2 and double green. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, mill 3 cards, then return a lane card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Activated abilities of lands you control cost 1 less to activate, and land creatures you control get +1/+1. This is a lot, but is this something that tickles your fancy as well, or is this just because I love turtles?
This might be the coolest card from the set, honestly. Like, it's so unique. It does stuff we've just actually never seen before. So for me, like, the first mode, million ramping, whatever, that's like Windgrace or, like, it's fine. Like, it makes it into kind of like a solemn simulacrum where probably ramping. I don't know how often you're attacking with this. It's only a 3/3, but even if it's just like ETB ramp, that's a fine start. Land creatures you control get +1/+1. Yeah, I guess you can do some like creature land shenanigans or like whatever, animate all your lands, and this is a lord for them. The important thing for me is that activated abilities on lands you control cost 1 less to activate. That's the really exciting ability. And this card is so unique because whenever Wizards has ever printed cost reduction effects like this before, first, they normally only work with creatures. There's only a couple that even apply to lands anyway. And then, unless I'm missing something, every single other one they've ever printed says that the ability can't be reduced to less than 1. So you always have to pay 1 mana. Blossoming Tortoise, it doesn't care. Like, this can reduce your activated abilities on lands to literally 0. And that opens up a ton of different janky combos with this deck. There's like infinite power. I just did a short on YouTube about like infinite power combos with this. You can like repeatedly activate a Mutavault and it turns your Ceaseless Sear Blades, which is this card that gets a +1/+0 whenever you activate an elemental. So you just activate your Mutavault a million times, infinite power and fling it. There's like weird Deserted Temple, tap and untap, infinite mill shenanigans that you can do by putting an aura on the land. Deserted Temple is just 1 mana to activate to untap a land, but it'll be 0 with Blossoming Tortoise, so you can just keep doing it repeatedly. So this card, I'm very excited by this. I don't know if it can make it in 60 card formats. I feel like in 60 card formats, it's very much an against the odds card. I expect we'll be trying to pull off a cool combo with it, but I don't think it's supposed to be like a top tier, like competitive card in 60 card formats. You're the Commander expert though, Tomer. Like, how do you view this in Commander? It's not a legend. Like, where are you putting this in Commander? It's obviously cool, but what decks does it go in? How do you support this?
I think the combos are really nice, but like you said, since it's not a commander itself, focusing on the combo side primarily might be a little bit too inconsistent, I would say, for my taste. I think this card is a slam dunk in land decks. Like anything like Lord Windgrace, Titania, anything that cares about ramping with lands and also self-milling so you can get your lands out of the graveyard, like Splendid Reclamation that returns all lands you control from your graveyard to the battlefield. These effects are going to be amazing with Blossoming Tortoise. So I think this card is already very good from its first ability. It's ETB and attack trigger, which self-mills and ramps. I think that card is already playable just by itself. Being able to combo off and win just kind of dovetails really nicely with those land decks. Like, you could just be running some of those combo pieces, and then you're going to just naturally fall into those or tutor up the pieces once you have Blossoming Tortoise. And then land creatures you control get +1/+1. It's nice. It's there. Some commanders will actually care about animating lands and striking out like that. So the Anthem is nice, but I think just like the main attack and enter the battlefield trigger is going to be really, really nice for land decks. And then the fact that you can also become a finisher is just, it's great. I think this card's very good. But I know a lot of people were complaining. It's like, oh, it's not a legendary creature. And like, I get it, but
yeah, it would be a really cool build around as a legend, but you can't make everything legendary, even in 2023. Also worth mentioning, like, works really well with some of the old filter lands where it's like pay a colorless to activate to make 2 mana of a color. Like, anything like that becomes really strong, but I don't know how deep you can go with it not being your commander. It seems really risky to like fully overload, but like you said, it's a fine value card anyway. Like, even if you don't try to go full on combo-y, like, it's still good in like a Windgrace style deck or a Lands Matter style deck, especially if you have graveyard synergies. I gotta ask you about a card that I think might be my favorite design in the set. And I think this is one that's like got commander ramifications, but is also really good in 60 card formats. And this is a card that when I first saw it, I said, I think this is just like peak 2023 Magic design. And that's Surge Ender the Meal Ender. To me, this card is just like everything the perfect Magic card in 2023 is. It's like a meme. It's based on the original Throne of Eldraine trailer. It's this super goofy, flavorful design. I feel like that's like just the epitome of Magic in 2023. And the card I think is actually really strong. So it's a 2-mana 3/1 legendary artifact creature Food Knight. It has trample, hexproof, and haste as long as the opponent controls a planeswalker. Whenever an artifact you control is put in the graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on it and scry 1, and it's a food. So you can pay 2, sack it, gain life equal to its power. So I think this card is like, what do you think of the flavor of this, Tomer? I've seen some people, when I said I thought this was like a masterpiece of design, were like, no, it's cringe. It's actually cringe. I don't know what you're talking about. Is it? Do you think
we're playing Magic the Gathering. I don't think we should take these cards too seriously. I don't know what to say. This is probably my favorite card as well from the format in terms of using a trailer lore. Like, it's a very lore specific card. The text all matches the flavor. Like, why? Like, if you look at this card without the context of the lore, it doesn't really make sense. Like, why would it have trample, hexproof, and haste as long as an opponent controls a planeswalker? Well, you can kind of suss out that maybe this thing has a grudge against planeswalkers. But when you watch, the trailer and you see that Garrick actually ate her partner.
I think it's her boyfriend, partner, or whatever. Yeah.
The other gingerbread cookie friend, whatever. Ate it. You can see it. And then she like swears revenge. She like takes up arms. Like, it makes perfect sense. And the rest of the card is very cool. It's a food, so it can sacrifice itself. And whenever another artifact you control is put into the graveyard, so that's probably like the other gingerbread just got eaten.
They get like the Hulk power, like she gets angry and
I could see it being like pretty decent in like a treasure decks. But do you think this is going to be like something that is going to see a lot of play in 1v1 formats? How prevalent are planeswalkers these days?
Okay, so Planeswalkers actually kind of awkwardly, Wizards just announced they're on the downswing. They're only making 1% now. So in Standard, that is a bit of a drawback. But I think in 60 card formats, the second mode is really the big one. Whenever another artifact you control goes to the graveyard from the battlefield, +1/+1 counter and scry 1. You mentioned treasures. Treasures are pretty plentiful in constructed Magic. Plus, we're going to food Standard. We still have blood tokens in Standard. So there's a lot of these cheap artifact tokens that you can sacrifice. And this starts off at a pretty good rate, like a colorless 2-mana 3/1. You don't have to sack that many artifacts, and this is like a 5/3 or a 6/4, which is really, really strong. The other reason I'm really high on this, though, is actually going back to Modern, where you have decks like Hardened Scales, where the whole gimmick is kind of like you're playing Hardened Scales, which adds an extra counter to things, and then you're sacrificing a bunch of stuff to like Arcbound Ravagers, so you're just constantly sacking artifact creatures. This is just going to get really huge alongside your Arcbound Ravager. You got the Ozolus, so you can move counters around. So I think in a deck like that, it could be really good. Back in Modern, there are a lot of Planeswalkers. This comes down in hastily snipes, like Renin 6 is really popular, to Fairy Time Raveler is really popular. So that gives it even more upside. So for some reason, this weird meme legend, whenever I see a legend, I just assume, Wizards is probably designing this for Commander. But after reading this card, I think they actually designed it as much for like Modern as they did for Commander. Is this good in Commander? Someone said, is this the new best colorless Commander? And my initial take was like, isn't it really hard to make artifact tokens if you're colorless? Like, you can't play all the good, like, Docksides and Bootlegger Stash and all these ways where you make tons of treasure tokens. Is this even a good Commander or not really?
I don't think so. I think it's interesting that it is a 2-drop colorless commander. Like, I know that my favorite colorless commanders, the ones that I would consider the best, like Kozilek the Great Distortion, even to an extent like Traxos, Scourge of Trug, or the new Karn. I think those are all really good. They all are on the more expensive side, and the greatest weakness to colorless decks and Commander is that they must be focused on artifact ramp to ramp out your commanders. So artifact board wipes are very, very bad for the colorless deck. So you're just going to get got by it. It doesn't matter what type of colorless deck you are. You're going to lose when somebody Vandal blasts you once or twice, or farewells you like once or twice. Sir Ginger at least is a 2-drop. So like in the worst case scenario where you do get board wiped, you probably can be able to recast her once or twice just with natural lane drops and everything. So that is something. But yeah, I didn't really consider her too much in in a commander, but maybe the 99 of like food decks, that could be kind of cool. It is flavorful on the food thing.
Literally, yeah.
Yes.
It is
but
food.
there was one card when we're talking about like modern versus commander and stuff. There was one card that I was like, was this for commander? But then I thought about it again and was like, actually, will this break like multiple constructed formats? And that was Beseech the Mirror. I don't know if you've talked about this on the podcast before, because it did get it got revealed like a couple days ago, I guess. So Beseech the Mirror is a black sorcery mythic. It's 1 and triple black, so it has a big black commitment. It has Bargain, which is a new mechanic that says you may sacrifice an artifact, enchantment, or token as you cast a spell. And it says search your library for a card, exile face down, then shuffle. If the spell was Bargain, you may cast the exile card without paying its mana cost. If that spell's mana value is 4 or less, put that exile card into your hand if it wasn't cast this way. So either it's 4 mana, Diabolic Tutor, that costs 1 more black, essentially, like instead of 2 and double black, it's 1 and triple black. But if you bargain with it, if you sacrifice any artifact, enchantment, or token, and it's a 4 mana value or less spell, you get to cast it for free. So there's no like mana cost associated to actually tutoring it. You just tutor it and immediately cast it. So it's like 4 mana, put like the 1 ring onto the battlefield. Or isn't Shieldred also 4 mana?
Shieldred's 4 mana.
So you could be like 4 mana, just put your Shieldred from your library onto the battlefield. 4 mana, put your 4 mana 1 ring from the library onto the battlefield. Is this card was this card made to destroy constructed, or am I reading this wrong?
No, you are not reading this card wrong. I think that this card is actually like, if anything, I'm worried this card is actually broken and just too good. Like, I cannot imagine a world where this card is not incredibly strong in 60 card formats. And I think there's an actual fear that like it might actually just be broken. And if you really think about it, it's essentially assuming you can bargain it, and bargaining it in some ways reminds me of like Luris. One of the problems we saw with Luris is, especially when you go back to older formats like Legacy and Vintage, the cost of only playing permanents with mana value 2 or less is really non-existent, because you're already going to be doing that in a deck that's competitive in a format like Legacy or Vintage. So there's kind of no cost to it. A lot of the decks that would want this, like Storm-style combo decks that are using this to get a finisher or whatever, they're already playing like Lotus Petals and Chrome Moxen, and in Vintage, the original Moxen. So you already have all these random artifacts that you can sacrifice. So you can just slot this in, and this is just get my finisher, get my best card in my deck for 4 mana every single time. So I am actually really worried that like this card might actually be too good, especially in combo decks. Like, using it for value, I think we will see people like, oh, sack my Orcish Bowmaster token, get a Shieldred, or get a 1 ring. Like, it's good enough. We've seen Bring to Light be 5 mana, and you got to be in 5 colors, and it only tutors up some things. And that card has seen very legitimate competitive play in various formats. This seems so much stronger than that. So yeah, I think this card is borderline broken in 60 card formats. I've seen several people posting like turn 1 win lines with this card in formats like Legacy, where you just like use this to get in the Storm combo and then win the game. So I guess we'll have to wait and see, but I think this card, if anything, it's probably too good. On the other hand, you do have to your deck does have to be able to bargain. If you're not bargaining it, it's bad, right? Even in Commander, yeah. I think that's true. Like, if you're bargaining it, this seems pretty good in Commander to me, but if you're not bargaining it, it's Diabolic Tutor with a harsher mana cost, so you wouldn't even play it. How good is it in Commander, Tomer? Like, is this also a scary card, or does the casual nature of Commander mean the format will regulate itself and whatever, it'll be fine?
I think, yeah, the format can take so much beats, you know, like we already have Dockside, we have the 1 ring, we have Jeweled Lotus, like it's so hard to make the Commander format as a whole not fun, because it's already broken. Everything is already broken. The card pool is so vast, and it really is held together by basically Rule Zero conversations of just like, don't go overboard with things. So I'm not worried about this at all with Commander. Like, yeah, you're going to be finding your 1 ring or whatever, and that's kind of boring, but like, I don't know. People will be like, hey, that's kind of boring, and you'll probably stop doing that. If you're at tables where it's boring. Like if you're at high power tables, then fine, yeah, it's another tool. Maybe even CEDH. Like CEDH people might be excited to run this, and that's like a good spot for it to be run. But I was just curious, mostly for like 1v1 formats. Like I didn't even think about Legacy, but I was thinking like, is there any chance this could, like, there's no way this would be banned, but would it cause like Shieldred to be emergency banned or something? Is that something that could be possible?
I mean, so I'm in the camp where I think they already should have banned Shieldred, so I might be a little biased here because I'm starting from the place of like, I think they should have banned Shieldred last time around. But one of my concerns about this set is a lot of what I would consider to be the strongest cards for Standard happen to be cards that also would go into a Shieldred deck. So you got Beseech the Mirror to tutor up Shieldred. There's this other bargain card. Can I find the name of it? So there's a bargain card. It's a 3-mana common, I believe. That's if you back for seconds, 3-mana uncommon, return 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. But if you bargain it, you can put one with mana value 4 or less onto the battlefield instead. So this is essentially like 3 mana, get something back to your hand and reanimate Shieldred. There's a black mythic, Virtue of Persistence, which 2 mana, target creature gets -3, you gain 2 life is the adventure mode. And then it's a enchantment for 7 mana, you reanimate something from any graveyard on your upkeep. So a lot of the cards that I think are strongest just go into the black deck that is already the best deck in Standard because of Shieldred. So I think there's a chance. I think we'll have to wait and see. I'm like holding out hope that some of these synergy decks can compete, that we see like, okay, like Fairies is strong enough that it can compete, or Adventures is strong enough, or like the Roll enchantment deck is strong enough that they can actually compete with the Shieldred deck. But if that doesn't turn out to be the case, I think you just got to do it. So yeah, I think there is an actual chance. And I think it also increases odds of the One Ring getting banned in formats like Modern or Historic on Arena, where this is just another card that's going to make that card show up more often. You're going to see the One Ring more often. You're going to see Shieldred more often. So I think that is an actual legitimate concern. I need to ask you, Tomer. I want to ask you about the Enchanted Tales in a minute, because I have a little Enchanted Tale rant that I wanted to get into, but I also wanted your opinion on them. But I got to ask you about a couple of like pretty iconic characters, and then they spoiled the cards on them. And my initial impression was like, wow, these are really bad, but I want to know what I'm missing. And that is Rowan and Will. So we got Rowan and Will making a return. They're kind of inverted versions of each other. Rowan is a Rakdos 3-mana 4/2 with Menace. You can tap, and spells you cast that are black or red cost X less to cast, where X is the amount of life you lost this turn. And then Will is a 3-mana 2/4 Azorius Legend. Same ability, except it's for white and blue spells, and it's the amount of life you gain this turn. So when I saw this, I was kind of like, wow, are these cards just like, you gotta play them, you gotta untap with them, you gotta have a handful of cards, you gotta gain life or lose life, and then it kind of ramps you? Am I missing something? Are these like hype cards I should be excited for? Or are these cards kind of like a lot of hoops to jump through to make them work?
I think they're both actually quite good. Being able to have, like, imagine this is a 3-mana rock that instead of being like, it taps to add 1 mana of any color, or taps to add 1 generic mana rather, it can tap to generate like 20 colorless mana. That's kind of how I see it.
Okay.
You can't just like storm off and cast colorless spells. It has to be, like in the case of Rowan, it has to be black and red, and Will, it has to be white and blue. But I think Rowan is actually kind of broken, because think about how easy it is in black and red to lose life in order to gain some value. Fetch lands, for example. If you crack a fetch land, you lost 1 life, so suddenly Rowan costs 1 less to cast. If you're doing stuff like Necropotence, you could lose a lot of life and immediately cast giant things while drawing a whole bunch of cards. So I think that's where the direction Rowan is going to be taking. I think this card is really good gas. It's basically black and red just have a lot of ways of losing life for value. For black, it's usually drawing cards. For red, it's usually like a group burn effect. So if you could like just lose a bunch of life off of Necropotence and then cast like Crackle of Power or something, some giant X spell off Rowan, you're just going to win the game. So I feel like Rowan is going to be a powerhouse of a commander. I think Will is a little bit more limited on the cool things you can be doing with him. Like gaining life is a little bit more of a hoop than losing life. It's much easier because good cards often say, because we're so good, you're going to have to lose life in order to get a value out of it. Whereas Will, gaining life is actually something that it's an additional like bonus for the thing that you have to usually pay more mana for, or at least not pay less mana for. So it's still very good. Like if you have like Soul Sisters and stuff, you're going to be passively gaining a lot of life, and then you can dump it into giant X spells, like draw X cards or whatever like that. That's good. So I think both of them are strong commanders. I just think Rowan is going to be the easier one to break. You just like lose a bunch of life doing things Rakdos wanted to be doing anyway, and then just dump it into like a Comet Swarm, into Crackle Power, and you just win the game. I guess so that's my take on it.
I guess that does make a lot of sense. I definitely agree that I think Rowan is the more powerful of the two, and I think that holds for 60 card formats as well, where we see like Death Shadow be a really good card, because fetch lands, shock lands, pain lands make it very easy to lose life, and you can do that in Commander too. Like even if you're not going super deep, like you crack a fetch and get a shock, and all of a sudden all your red and black spells cost 3 less. That's kind of actually pretty frightening. Will seems like a little bit more work. I guess to me in Commander, they just seem kind of boring. Like a 3-mana mana rock with a lot of upside is cool, but do I want a mana rock in my command zone when I could play something that was doing something a little bit more spicy? So maybe I underrated them a little bit initially, but I don't know. I guess I was hoping for something more out of the return of Will and Rowan, I would say.
I like them. I think being able to cast like X spells for free and just dumping like X equals 10 abilities is kind of cool. But there is one card. I don't know if you spoke about this last week, but I need to get your hot take on it, because Wizards of the Coast, there has to be a fan on design of you, Seth. And I think they went out of their way to make sure that every single set has a new Panharmonicon. And this time, did they crush it? Did they just break Panharmonicon? Virtue of Knowledge? Did you speak about this yet? It's a 4 and a blue.
We haven't done any of these cards on the podcast, so we haven't talked about any of them on the podcast yet. So go ahead, Tomer. What's our new Panharmonicon? What's the text?
So this is a new blue enchantment. It's 4 and a blue, and it has adventure. So the adventure side is Vantress Visions. It's 1 and a blue for an instant adventure. Copy target activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. So that's really cool. It's like a Lithiform engine, a one-shot Lithiform engine. For 2 mana on one of your things. And then the enchantment side is 5 mana. If a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So it's a permanent, not a creature or an artifact. It's like any permanent. It's like Elish Norni, kind of, I guess. It just triggers another time. What do you think about this, Seth? Is this the best Panharmonicon that has ever been printed in life?
This card actually makes me feel really bad, because we knew in Mark Rosewater's teaser there was a new Panharmonicon. He like teased the text of Panharmonicon, the doubling triggered abilities. So of course I'm very excited about a new Panharmonicon. And then I saw the card, and my initial reaction was kind of like, meh, okay. Like, I don't think, like, it's fine, and I like it, and I'll play it, and I'm excited to build, like, Elish Norn with Virtue of Knowledge in Standard, jam it in Commander decks, but I think it's kind of like, I don't know, compared to Yarok or Elish Norn, I feel like it's not better than those. I'm intrigued by the adventure mode. That mode, I think, is sneaky powerful as ramp. I tried to pitch this to the rest of the Goldfish crew. Like, is this the best blue ramp spell in Commander? Just like crack a fetch, copy it. It's blue rampant growth, and everyone shot me down. Although I'm still gonna try to do it. But I guess like doubling your Muldrifter trigger in the early game, maybe doubling a fetch land, ramps you into the Virtue of Knowledge, and then the actual Panharmonicon mode. It is better than actual Panharmonicon, I think. The main challenge is in 60 card formats. It's hard to take off turn 4 to play Panharmonicon without dying. And this is an additional mana, so you have an even bigger ask to like take a turn off to get it on the battlefield. So I definitely will try this card for fun and for against the odds. But I think for me, it's mostly a commander card, and it's in the right colors, which is good. If you look at the decks that play Panama God, a lot of them are blue blank decks, they're rune style decks, they're ETB base blue decks, Brago style decks. So it's in the right colors that color identity shouldn't be a big issue. So I feel like if you're playing Panama God in your commander deck, you either play this on top of it or in some cases instead of it. But at 5 mana, I want a cheaper one. I want like the 2 mana Panama God or something. That's what'll get me hyped for constructed. Give me the 2 mana Panama God.
I agree. It's not too different. Like the Panama God side isn't too different. I do like the adventure side. Like I don't agree that it's like the best ramp in blue, but like I think you're going to be running this card in any Panama God deck. And then the 2 mana side is just going to be good in any Panama God deck, right? Like you said, you're going to be running Mull Drifters and other ETB triggered ability stuff because you're a Panama God deck. So if you run that out early, you can use the adventure side and then drop Virtue of Knowledge a little bit later. And I do love the idea of like you crack a fetch land, and then you pay 2 mana to Rampant Growth as an extra thing or a Farseek or whatever. That's really sweet. Okay, so you're not super stoked about this in 1v1. I wanted to ask you, we haven't seen all the cards yet, but from just your general first impressions, is there any deck that you're most interested in playing for 1v1? Has there any like have the cogwheels been turning and be like, yes, the first thing like when the early access event comes out, I want to try out like this? Is there anything on your radar that like if it becomes a deck, I want to try it out?
Yeah, so one that I'm really intrigued by is actually the roll mechanic. It's pretty unique. These creatures that just like put this semi-useless enchantment onto the battlefield, but there's actually a lot of synergies for it. We just got this new anthem that's 2 mana, all your enchanted creatures get +2/+2. It reminds me a lot of Tempered Steel, which is kind of like a classic budget card where you just play all your Ornithopters and Memnites and then drop Tempered Steel and kill people. So I really want to try roll aggro. That's very high on my list. I also have high hopes for adventures. I'm not seeing something so far. I guess we have the Mythic Balloona, which I don't know if that's actually enough. I'm not seeing anything to really push me to putting all the adventures together in a deck, is what I was going to say. I think a lot of the adventures are going to be strong standalone cards, just because adventure is a powerful mechanic, but I don't know if we have the pieces for an actual full-on adventure deck. And then from a less competitive perspective, there's a ton of things I just want to try, like Agatha and Agatha's Soul Cauldron is just really weird. This like activated ability reduction thing. I don't even know what to do with it yet. I haven't figured out the deck for it yet, but I feel like there has to be something there. So yeah, there's a lot of possibilities. Whenever I go into these brews, I get a little fear that like, Shieldred is still a thing. The One Ring's still a thing. Can it actually hold up from a competitive perspective? That's what I'm not sure of, but there are many, many things that I'm excited to try for the set, and I feel like I really like the design of it. Like, when I heard we were going back to Eldraine, I was actually a little worried, because original Eldraine was so broken. It was just, like, so pushed, and I feel like this set, it feels like Eldraine, like we talked about in the intro, and it feels powerful, but there's also nothing that's standing out like an Oko or a Bone Crusher Giant that was actually just like a big negative for constructed formats because it was too pushed. So hopefully this actually hits the right power level. I guess let me ask you that then, Tomer. Like, what about for Commander? What's your number one Commander that you just can't wait to build that we've seen so far?
I honestly haven't been looking too deeply on which commanders I really want to build. Like, obviously, Kellen's cool, but personally, I actually just like Akiri more as my Cauldron commander. Like, yes, this literally finds a Cauldron piece, but I really like the playstyle of Akiri where it's just very consistent card draw engine in the command zone, and provides a little bit of resiliency to removal too. I just like that, and it's also inoffensive and it doesn't draw too much hate. At least in my playgroups, it's been fine. Blossoming Tortoise is obviously really good. If I was more competitive minded, I'd probably go for Rowan. But actually, I think out of all of them, there was a face commander for the fairy deck. And it was like, I think it's like when you cast your first spell on an opponent's turn, you make a fairy card. And whenever a fairy attacks, you draw a card. I need to see if I can find it very quickly. I forgot the name of it, but it'll be popping up on the screen.
I know what you're talking about, but I also there's so many new cards. The names all blend together.
So it's a leader of the fairy precon, and I have a confession that fairies are like one of my favorite creature types in Magic. It's probably like top 2. I think dragons and fairies are basically the 2 top ones for me.
If fairies make it in standard, will you start playing standard again? Will we get a Tomer standard like fairy video? Okay.
I will. So when Delver became standard legal again, I played Delver, I got into Mythic, and then I just didn't open up Magic Arena ever since. But if fairies become even halfway viable, if they're just kind of decent, like tier 2, I will grind it to Mythic. I do not care. I love them. I never got to play fairies in Lorwyn, which was 15 years ago or something at this point. I didn't get to enjoy it, but I've always longed for that. I feel like if there was ever an era of Magic that I wish I was actually playing for, I wish it was Fairy Lorwyn, because I love blue black. I love blue tempo decks. I love attacking with small evasive creatures and then having cheap answers to just keep my opponents off guard. And then eventually win the game before they can assemble a real answer to me. That's my favorite style of play. That's why I love Delver of Secrets, for example. And if I have to play Legacy, it's always Is It Delver, for example. If it shows up in Standard, oh my god. If it even shows up in a Modern or something, oh my god, even more. That'd be wonderful. But what do you think on this, Seth? Do you think fairies are going to be a true menace in Standard or Modern even? Is there anything broken it?
So there are some good fairies in this set. I think there's a 2-drop. Oh boy, so many card names to remember. There's a 2-drop that can tap to loot, and then it also has Lazev's ability where you can pay X and turn it into a copy of a creature in your graveyard. I think that card is really, really strong. I think that Talion, a card we've talked about before, because that was a very early spoiler, the Mythic 4-drop has potential to be good. There's a pseudo lord in the 3-drop slot. So you can see the pieces. My concern is in Standard right now, the best deck is Dimir Midrange. Which kind of plays a little bit it's kind of a tempo-y deck that's got some counters and got some removal. And it's playing just the best Dimir card. So it's playing Shieldred and Graveyard Trespasser. It does have Fairy Mastermind. So what I think is going to happen is you got Fairy Mastermind. People are going to add the 2-drop Looter Fairy to the deck. And then we're going to have a Standard Pro Tour. And Wizards is going to advertise Dimir Fairies being a top tier deck in Standard. Because it has those 2 fairies in it. Yeah.
And stuff,
even though it's Shieldred and a Valve Sleeper, a Tenacious Underdog. So I'm skeptical that it can beat out just the generic good Dimir deck, but I think it's got enough pieces that you can build a fairy deck and win a decent amount of games with it. Not seeing much for Modern though for fairies. It's very different than Lorwyn fairies. Lorwyn fairies were very much flash-based spell stutter sprites, Vendilion clicks. So you're just never tapping out on your turn. It's all during your opponent's turn. These fairies are much more tap out during my turn, get them on the battlefield. They play a little more tap out style, I think. So I would be surprised if they make it into Modern. Although we are getting, and this is perfect segue to Enchanted Tales, we are getting all these Enchanted Tales, and it includes Bitter Blossom. So we're getting Bitter Blossom on Arena for the first time, which I think might mean fairies have a chance in Historic, which is Arena Vintage or Legacy, essentially. So you'll have these new fairies, you got some old ones, you get Bitter Blossom. But I really want to ask you about these Enchanted Tales, Tomer. So Enchanted Tales, it's the Strixhaven Mystical Archives or Brothers War Retro Artifacts. It's one of those special slots where every pack you open, you're going to get one of these. And I gotta say, I was kind of blown away when Wizards started spoiling these cards, because there's just some really, really good reprints. You have Doubling Season in there, Bitter Blossom, Kindred Discovery, Land Tax, Necropotence, Omniscience, Parallel Lives, Rhystic Study, Smothering Tide, Sneak Attack. It's a who's who list of the most expensive, best enchantments in Commander, with this pretty sweet new art. There's anime versions of a lot of them, but those are a lot of just really high-end expensive cards. And I came away from it feeling is this the real Commander Masters? We just had this big conversation about Commander Masters, how expensive it was. And I found myself thinking, if they're going to like have this good of reprints in a normally priced set, maybe I should just buy this. Maybe if you want these cards, aren't you better off just buying some normally priced boxes of Wilds of Eldraine than $300 some boxes of Commander Masters to try to get these Enchanted Tales? So what did you think? I was kind of blown away by it.
To clarify with you, because I don't exactly remember. I believe like each booster, it doesn't even matter if it's like set or draft booster, will have one slot for Enchanting Tales.
Yes.
So we're guaranteed one of these per pack.
Although I did only mention the best one. There's also like Impact Tremors or Raid Bombardment. So there are like uncommon ones. So you could get a dud, but yes, every pack does give you one.
Well, I mean, I noticed that there were even like some uncommons that were really nice. Like one of the latest ones that got spoiled was Season of Growth, which was already creeping up to like $2. So
Utopia Sprawl's like $5. Curiosity. Yeah. So even the uncommons are not horrible. Garruk's Uprising sees a lot of play.
Yeah, I saw there was a lot of really good ones being on the list. Land Tax is one of my favorites. I know you don't run basics, so that doesn't matter to you. But like also like Karmic Guide hasn't gotten or Karmic Justice hasn't gotten a reprint in a very long time, and that got shown recently. So yeah, there's a lot of really good cards being printed here, and they're going to be accessible because they're going to be showing up guaranteed in every pack. Like, yes, there is a large card pool to choose from. I think it was like 20 anime versions, and then like 60 I think there's 60
something altogether. Yeah.
So like, yeah, there's a decent. Well, I mean, there's one guaranteed in each pack. I don't know. That seems actually kind of decent odds to find what you're looking for eventually. Like, yeah. I'm not a buy packs person. I'm a buy singles person. So I'm not saying like, oh, well, if you want your doubling season, maybe you should buy a booster box. No, just wait like 2 weeks and then buy the doubling season. Don't be an idiot. Like, just buy the freaking thing. Stop buying packs.
But what if you're a degenerate pack opener like me, Tomer? What would be better to buy? So you are totally right. Like, the correct advice is buy singles, not packs in either case. But I will say, as someone who loves opening packs, because of how good these Enchanted Tales are, I would much rather buy $300 boxes of Wilds of Eldraine and crack them open than buy one $300 box of Commander Masters, personally. Like, I'm just like so blown away by how good this sheet is, and how there was a lot of complaints about like, why doesn't Wizards put expensive cards in normally priced packs? Whenever they reprint the good cards, they're in really expensive packs. And I think this is a really good example of Wizards putting expensive cards in the normally priced pack. So hopefully we see more of that in the future. Although I do have a complaint here. So these cards, a lot of them are new to Arena for the first time. And Wizards, Historic's a really fun format, but Wizards has announced they are pre-banning some of these cards. Tomer, have you seen this yet? I'm curious. Have you seen? Okay, so you already know. I was going to quiz you and see if you would guess the ones they're pre-banning. So they're pre-banning 6 of these cards. Sadly, Blood Moon, I was so excited when they spoiled Blood Moon, but then they banned it, which that makes sense. I get it. Like, I would love to have it be legal, but for the sake of everyone else, that's fine. So Blood Moon, that one's banned. That makes a lot of sense to me. Necro being banned, that also makes perfect sense to me, that you wouldn't want that going on in the format. The ones that really confuse me, that also Sneak Attack, sure, if you want to ban that, that's fine. But some of them really confuse me, with the biggest two being, first, Land Tax. And I'm very curious what you think of Land Tax being banned. To me, Land Tax doesn't seem like the kind of card that would be a concern in a 60 card format. Like, you got to play a bunch of basic planes. It's like, sure.
No, you don't have any planes of any basic lands.
Or you got to play a bunch of basic lands, I guess. But you got to play a bunch of basic lands. It's low value. Like, is this a card that's of a bannable power level, Tomer, in your opinion?
So I don't know the history of land tax in 1v1 formats, but what I can imagine is like if I'm playing like Azorius Control and I need a 1-drop, I can't think of many 1-drops I'd like more than land tax, especially because like if you could run like a 4 of it, then you can actually maybe cut down like 1 or 2 lands as well in your deck for 2 more answers. So it's like a 1-drop, like especially if you don't have like Ponder Preordains or something. If you do, then maybe that's fighting for a spot. But like imagine your control deck, you're going on the draw, you drop down a land tax, and then one turn. After one turn, you draw 3 basic lands, and you have your land drops for like the rest of the game. And then for the rest of the game, you like, okay, I have all my land drops, so now I can start literally deck thinning. Like every single turn, you take 3, you put it into the graveyard, or you put reanimation targets into the graveyard and go from there. I think that card is going to be be very strong in 1v1. Like that would be my first look at it. But
I can buy that. I can buy that it would be pretty good in a control deck. But that's not the worst of it, Tomer. The worst one is spreading seas. Spreading seas. 2-mana enchantment. ETB, draw a card. Enchanted land is an island. Why would you ban
Merfolk would be too good.
Do you think that's it? I've been going back and forth. Like, that's the only thing that kind of makes sense to me is they're worried about the Island Walk Lords and Merfolk just getting people. But I see a lot of people being like, oh, it's land destruction. I'm like, no, it's literally not land destruction. It's like slight land annoyance. It's like you got to use your land as an island now. It doesn't even put you down a land. So
Is there a reason?
They did not. They just announced on Twitter that they're banned. The other one was Intruder Alarm, which I guess I can kind of see. Intruder Alarm is always a combo piece. We've never really had Intruder Alarm be a competitive combo piece in 60-card format, so that would make me think, oh, give it a shot and see what happens, and then ban it if someone actually figures out a way to break it. But the Spreading Seas one is just one of the weirdest bannings to me of all time. Like, it's so strange.
I think people really like their Nykthoses and stuff, so maybe like
but that's too
like Nykthos doesn't want to
good. That's too Nykthos is too good. We
wouldn't want to have counters for Nykthos. That's crazy.
No, we need Maze's End to win on turn 6 every game. We can't have people stopping that.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess just like anything that can efficiently mess with somebody's lands is just off the table. Like Blood Moon, I can understand being a little bit too strong. Yeah. Spreading Scenes, so I mean,
the funniest part
so minor
is like Cleansing Wildfire is very legal, and there's never been a conversation about that. And that's like 2 mana, blow up a land. The player can get a basic land and draw a card. So I guess it's like slightly less of land hate, but it's still kind of similar if it hits your dual land and you got to downgrade to a basic land where it's diminishing your mana and cantripping. But who knows?
Yeah, Spreading Seas I think is a lot better though, because you're the one who draws the card.
Well, you draw from Cleansing Wildfire too.
You're the one drawing the card.
You draw the card, but if whoever loses a land gets to get a basic if they have one. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know then. That's weird.
Anyway, I think that's Wilds of Eldraine. We're getting near the end of the cast, so we have time for a single fish mail question. So if you want to send in fish mail for next week, tag them at MTGGoldfish, hashtag them MTGFishmail. Our question for today comes from @Ron Belowski. This says, Seth mentioned that cards like Farsight Ritual being worse than Memory Deluge. This would have been fine if Deluge had rotated out of Standard. My question is, did design anticipate this change when designing, or did some of the set get diluted by WotC along the way? So this is a reference to the rotation change in Standard, with Wizards announcing no rotation this year. And the question is basically, did Wizards design knowing the rotation change? And the answer is no. Wizards actually explicitly said that Wilds of Eldraine was designed before they decided to cancel rotation for the year, switch to 3-year rotation. They haven't said specifically what set is the first one that they designed with this new schedule in mind, but we know for sure that Wilds of Eldraine is not. So when you see those situations where one card looks, strictly worse than a card that already exists, like Farsight Ritual just being a worse memory deluge because it doesn't have flashback, chances are when Wizards made Farsight Ritual, they were expecting that Memory Deluge would rotate from Standard and this would replace it. But then thanks to this change, we get both of them in Standard for a while. So we're going to go through some growing pains. I had mentioned this in the beginning. I'm really hyped about the design of Wilds of Eldraine. I think they're heading in the right direction to make Standard good, but I think the next year is going to be really rocky because I feel like the sets weren't designed for the rotation changes. We still have these holdover cards that are very, very strong in the format. So it's going to be a process over the next year until we get to the next rotation, where things are probably going to be a little bit hit or miss in Standard, I think. So I think long term, I'm really hyped about what the future can look like in Standard, but short term, it might actually be kind of a mess.
Hopefully, emergency bannings are still on the table. I know they said they're like no bannings, but
Yeah,
if everything's just like Shieldred.
ban the Shieldreds. But I don't know. I'm at the point where I didn't like the rotation changes, but I want to give them a chance. Like, I think I could very well be wrong. The changes are exactly the opposite of what I would have done. I want faster rotations and more changes. Like, that's how I would manage Standard. But that doesn't mean I'm right. I could very well be the one that's wrong. So I'm gonna see what it looks like, and hopefully something dethrones Shieldred, and we have a really fun format. Worst case, Wizards at least have shown that they are willing to reverse course on stuff like this if it doesn't work out. Because we saw that when they switched to faster rotation, and like 6 months later, they're like, oh no, like we don't want to do this. We switch back. So with all the stuff about, not banning except for once per year, the rotation, I feel like if it is a complete disaster, Wizards will hopefully do something different and fix it. So anyway, I think that brings us to the end of episode 447 of the MTG Goldfish podcast. So, Tomer, thanks so much for filling in at the last minute, talking some Wilds of Eldraine.
Thanks so much for having me. This was really fun, and I didn't swear a single time.
You're good. You're back on the approved list. I'm unshadow banning you as we speak. So, thanks to Tomer for joining us. Thanks everyone for listening. Thanks to Card Conduit for supporting the show. And we will be back next week to talk about whatever goes on in the world of Magic. So until then, have an amazing week, everyone. And this is a crew signing out.